It was supposed to be a short drive, just a few hours to clear my head. But silence can be cruel. It makes you hear the things you've tried to bury. When the car died on that empty road, I thought it was bad luck. Then he appeared. Torn clothes, quiet eyes, the kind that make you stay when you know you shouldn't. He said he'd help. I believed him. I shouldn't have. Before we go on, I need to be honest. My heart sank when I saw that almost 90% of you watch but don't subscribe. If you want to keep these stories alive, please like and subscribe. That one click means more than you think, because this isn't just about temptation. It's about how easily salvation can sound like sin. The road had been stretching for hours, long and unbroken like a thread drawn tight between two lives, the one I was escaping and the one I hadn't yet found. The air outside was dry, humming with the chorus of crickets, and the dying sun spread across the wheat fields like fire. I had left home before dawn, hoping distance could silence the noise in my head, but silence, I was learning, only amplifies what you try to hide. My husband's voice still lingered in my ears, his questions, his quiet suspicions, the look that said he already knew there was someone I thought about when I shouldn't. The steering wheel was warm under my hands, and the car smelled faintly of perfume and old leather. The radio crackled between stations, a choir fading into static, a preacher's voice cut short by wind. I remember thinking that I could drive forever if the road would just keep going, that maybe I could disappear between the sound of the tires and the horizon. But then the dashboard light flickered, once, twice, before the car began to tremble like something alive, struggling to breathe. I pulled over, gravel crunching under the tires, and as the engine gave its final sigh, everything went quiet. I stepped out into the stillness. The village stretched ahead, silent and half-forgotten, the kind of place you could drive past 100 times without remembering. A few houses crouched in the distance, roofs sagging under time. The smell of soil and smoke drifted on the evening wind. I tried my phone, no signal. The only sound was the slow ticking of the cooling engine and the soft rustle of the fields moving like a sea. For a moment, I thought I could fix it, that maybe if I waited long enough, the car would forgive me. But the sun kept sinking, and with it came the first trace of unease. I started walking. The gravel bit into my shoes, and the light dimmed until the sky bruised into violet. It was then that I saw him, a figure by the edge of the field, bent over something unseen. He lifted his head as if he'd heard me from miles away. The man was old, his face lined like bark, his hands dark and heavy from years of labor. He wore a coat that looked older than the road itself, and when he stood upright, I noticed the quiet steadiness in him. Not threatening, not inviting, but certain. "You lost?" he asked, his voice deep and rough as gravel. "My car stopped," I said, pointing back toward the road. "I think it's done for." He studied the horizon where my car sat like a wounded animal, then nodded once, slow. "Not much runs right out here," he said. "Come on, I'll take a look." He walked beside me without hurry. There was a rhythm to his steps, measured, deliberate. When he leaned under the hood, I watched the way his hands moved, sure, unbothered by the grime or the heat. The sky behind him burned orange, and for a moment I couldn't tell whether it was the sunset or the firelight of another kind. "Fuel line," he murmured, straightening up. "Could be worse, but you won't get it fixed tonight. So I wait until morning?" I asked, half hoping he'd say no. He wiped his hands on a rag that looked more like a memory than cloth. "Nearest shop's miles out. You can stay the night if you want. I've got a spare room. It's not much, but it's dry." There was a pause. I should have said no. Every instinct told me not to follow a stranger down a dirt path at dusk. But loneliness is persuasive. It dresses up danger as kindness, and I was tired of making decisions that kept me safe but empty. So I nodded. "Thank you," I said softly. His house stood at the edge of the field, a structure more of will than wood. The porch creaked beneath my steps, the air thick with the smell of damp earth and something faintly sweet. Hay, maybe, or memory. Inside, the light was low, a single lamp painting the walls in gold. A clock ticked somewhere unseen, steady and unbothered by time. He motioned toward the chair by the hearth, and I sat, feeling the warmth reach my hands. "Name's Thomas," he said, stirring the fire. "Been out here near 40 years. Don't get many visitors." "I'm Elise," I replied, my voice small in the large, quiet room. He nodded again, as though the name carried a weight he recognized. For a while, neither of us spoke. The fire crackled, shadows swayed against the walls, and outside, the wind began to rise. I could feel the distance between us like a line drawn in dust, fragile, waiting for a reason to blur. He poured tea into 2 mismatched cups. His hands trembled slightly, but his eyes didn't. "Long way from home," he said. I looked into the cup, at the reflection of the flame trembling on its surface. "Yeah," I whispered, longer than I meant to be. There was something about the way he looked at me then, not with hunger, but with understanding. As if he could see through the layers I'd wrapped around myself, the guilt, the weariness, the need. In that silence, the road outside might as well have vanished. It was just him, me, and the small sound of fire breathing between us. When I went to sleep that night, I thought I'd wake to the same emptiness I'd brought with me. I didn't know that by morning the world would look different, that the line between gratitude and something darker would already be fading. I woke to the sound of rain against the window. Soft at first, then heavier, like the sky had decided to empty itself all at once. The air was cool, the kind of cold that carries silence with it, and for a moment I forgot where I was. The ceiling above me was low, the wooden beams darkened by years of smoke and weather. A blanket, rough but warm, covered me. Somewhere below, I could hear the faint scrape of a chair, the clink of metal, and the distant murmur of a man talking to himself. Thomas. The memory returned in pieces. The broken car, the quiet offer, the firelight. I sat up slowly, my head still heavy with half-formed dreams. The window showed nothing but gray fields and rain. I found my shoes by the door and stepped out into the narrow hallway that led to the kitchen. The smell of coffee, bitter and grounding, greeted me first. He was there, as still as before, leaning against the counter with a mug in his hand. "Mornin'," he said, his voice carrying that same gravel calm. "Storm rolled in early." "I can see that." My voice cracked slightly like it hadn't been used in days. He nodded toward the chair by the fire. "Sit. You're not going anywhere till it clears. Roads'll be mud by now." I wanted to protest, to say I couldn't stay, that there was someone waiting for me somewhere. But the truth lodged in my throat. No one was waiting. Not really. My husband had grown used to silence between us, the kind that fills rooms like fog. I sat down. The chair was warm, the fire already lit again. Thomas poured coffee into a cup and handed it to me. His hands were steady this time. "You drive alone often?" "Not really," I said. "Just needed space." He studied me for a moment before nodding. "Space has its own cost," he said simply. Then he turned back to the window, watching the rain streak down the glass. "You can stay till it's done. Ain't safe to drive in this." The hours stretched quietly. Rain turned to thunder, and the wind pressed against the house like a living thing. He showed me around. The kitchen with its chipped counters, the small study lined with books that looked untouched for decades, the spare room filled with tools and photographs. There was one photo that caught my eye. A woman, her hair pinned up, her smile soft and distant. "She was your wife?" I asked before I could stop myself. He paused, following my gaze. "Yeah," he said finally. "Long time ago. What happened?" He didn't answer right away. The silence was thick, filled with the sound of rain hitting the roof. "She got sick," he said. Nothing we could do. I didn't press further. His voice carried something final, the kind of grief that no longer asks for comfort. Yet the way he stood there, his hand resting on the back of the chair, told me it hadn't left him. Grief never really does. It just changes its name. As the day passed, we talked in fragments, about weather, about work, about things that didn't matter, but somehow did. The fire burned low, the room dim with the gray of late afternoon. I told him about the city, about noise and traffic, about how sometimes it felt like I was disappearing in plain sight. He listened the way few people do, not waiting to reply, just listening. "You ever wonder what it'd be like," I said quietly, "to start over? Just walk away from everything?" He looked at me then, the corners of his eyes deepened by time. "I did that once," he said. "Thought I'd found peace out here. But peace don't come from leaving things behind. It comes from facing what you can't stand to look at." The words sank into me like rain into dry ground. Maybe that's why I didn't move when his hand brushed against mine. Not deliberate, not hesitant, just there. The contact was brief, almost accidental, but it sent a quiet current through the air. Neither of us spoke. Outside, thunder rolled across the fields, and for a heartbeat, it felt as if the world had shrunk to that room, that touch, that silence. When evening came, the power flickered and went out. The house fell into shadows broken only by the fire. I helped him light a lantern, our faces close, the glow catching in his eyes. He smiled faintly, and in that moment, I saw not the years on his face but something ageless, something raw and steady, the way old trees hold storms without breaking. He poured another cup of coffee, this time for himself, and we sat across from each other. The storm outside was relentless now, hammering against the windows. "It'll pass," he said softly. But he wasn't talking about the rain. Maybe it was loneliness, or the sound of thunder, or the way he looked at me like he could see every secret I'd ever tried to hide. Whatever it was, something in me shifted. I felt it like a thread pulling loose, and suddenly I didn't care what it meant. I didn't care about right or wrong, about the world beyond those walls. There was only this, the quiet, the warmth, the unbearable closeness of another person who understood what it meant to be alone. When he reached across the table and took my hand, I didn't pull away. The storm outside roared, but inside everything went still. And in that stillness, I realized the rain wasn't the only thing that had begun to fall. Night had swallowed the house whole. The rain had slowed, but its echo lingered, a slow drip from the eaves, a sigh through the cracks in the wood. The air was thick, tasting of smoke and damp earth, and the fire had burned down to a faint red pulse in the hearth. I remember the moment I realized how quiet it had become. The kind of quiet that comes before something irreversible. Thomas sat across from me, his face half lit, half lost in shadow. He hadn't said a word since his hand touched mine. He didn't have to. The silence between us said more than words ever could, a silence charged with memory and need, something that felt both dangerous and tender. I wanted to speak, to say something to break whatever was building, but my throat betrayed me. The only sound was the soft crackle of the dying fire and the steady rhythm of our breathing. When he stood, it wasn't sudden. It was slow, deliberate, a motion that felt inevitable. He moved closer, the wooden floor creaking under his weight. My pulse quickened, my mind a blur of warnings and wishes. He stopped beside me, his shadow stretching long across the wall, and for a second, neither of us breathed. "You should rest," he said. His voice roughened by hesitation. I looked up at him, searching for something in his face. Mercy, restraint, maybe a reason to step back. But his eyes were a mirror of everything I was trying to hide. And in that reflection, I saw myself not as I was, but as I'd once been. Alive, wanted, unafraid. "I can't," I whispered. He didn't move. The silence deepened until it felt like the house itself was listening. When he finally reached out, it wasn't the touch of a stranger. It was something older, like recognition. His fingers brushed against my cheek, rough from work but careful, almost reverent. The warmth of his skin seemed to thaw something frozen inside me. I closed my eyes, and for a moment, I wasn't the woman who had driven away from a home full of questions. I was just a heartbeat, a breath, a body remembering what it meant to be seen. When he kissed me, the world stopped pretending to be innocent. It was slow, almost cautious at first. Two people testing the weight of what they already knew they'd lose. Then it deepened. The kind of kiss that steals the air from your lungs and replaces it with fire. The storm outside had passed, but a different one was rising, one we couldn't escape. There was no logic left, no morality, only the pull of something ancient and reckless. His hands trembled as if he, too, was caught between desire and regret. Every breath, every shiver, felt like an answer to a question neither of us had dared to ask aloud. I knew it was wrong. I knew it even as I leaned into it. But guilt, when wrapped in longing, starts to feel a lot like truth. Later, when the fire was nothing but faint embers and the air was heavy with what we'd done, I lay there staring at the ceiling, my heart still racing. He was beside me, silent, his breathing slow and even. I wanted to ask him what came next, but the words wouldn't come. Maybe because I already knew the answer. Nothing. There was no next. There was only this night, suspended in time, glowing faintly like a sin that didn't want to fade. Outside, the storm had moved on. The rain had left the world shining, washed clean, but inside me everything was stained. I thought about my husband, about the way he used to trace circles on my wrist when we first met, about how those small gestures had turned into routine. I had blamed him for the emptiness, but now I wondered if the emptiness had always been mine. Thomas stirred beside me. "You should sleep," he murmured, eyes still closed. I turned toward him, searching his face. "Do you regret it?" His jaw tightened, and for a long moment he didn't answer. Then, in that same calm, weathered voice, he said, "Regrets for people who think they could have stopped it." His words cut through me. There was no apology in them, no justification either, just truth. And somehow, that truth hurt more than anything else. I turned away, watching the faint outline of dawn beginning to creep through the window. Morning was coming, inevitable as consequence. We didn't speak again. The light slowly revealed the room. The worn floorboards, the dust floating like ash, the clothes scattered like evidence of something both sacred and ruinous. By the time the sun fully broke over the fields, the warmth of him beside me had turned cold. I stood quietly, dressed without a sound. The floor beneath me groaned, as if warning me that once I stepped outside, nothing would be the same. He didn't move, but I knew he wasn't asleep. When I reached the door, I heard him say softly, "Take the main road back." "It's clear now," I nodded, though he couldn't see it. My hand lingered on the doorframe for a moment longer, and then I walked out into the pale, broken morning. The world smelled of wet soil and forgiveness I didn't deserve. Each step back to my car felt heavier than the last. The storm had passed, but its memory clung to everything. The trees, the air, my skin. When I looked back at the house, it seemed smaller, like it was already retreating into the mist. But even as distance grew, I knew I hadn't really left anything behind. Some roads don't end where the map says they do. Some follow you home, and as I turned the key in the ignition, the engine started on the first try. The car had just needed rest. I wish I could say the same for me. The road home was quiet. The kind of quiet that feels like punishment. The storm had rinsed the world clean, but not me. The sky was pale and empty, a faded blue that looked too calm for what I carried inside. My hands trembled on the wheel, not from cold but from memory. Every turn of the tires pulled me further from that house and deeper into the ache of what I'd done. The air smelled of rain and ash, and I couldn't tell whether I was leaving something behind or dragging it with me. Thomas's words still echoed. Regrets for people who think they could have stopped it. I wanted to believe I couldn't, that the storm had made us both helpless, but lies, even gentle ones, rot fast in daylight. I could have stopped. I didn't. I'd crossed a line that had no way back. Yet somewhere inside that shame was a strange warmth. Not pride, not satisfaction, just the echo of being seen, of being touched by someone who looked at me without judgment. That was the cruelest part. The sin had felt like salvation. By the time I reached the edge of town, the sun was higher, lighting up the wet roofs and steaming pavement. My house waited at the end of the street, the same porch, the same flowers I'd planted months ago, their petals bent under rain. Everything was as it had been except me. My husband's car sat in the driveway. I watched the curtains move slightly, a shadow crossing behind them. He was home. He always was. When I stepped inside, the smell of coffee and faint cologne met me. Domestic, ordinary, almost merciful. He looked up from the kitchen table, surprise flickering across his face before it hardened into something else. "You made it back," he said. Just that. No smile, no embrace. "I did," I whispered. My voice felt foreign in the quiet. He studied me like a man reading a book he didn't trust. "The storm was bad," he said finally. "You stay somewhere?" The lie came easily. "An old farmer helped me. The car broke down." He nodded, his gaze lingering a second too long. Maybe he believed me. Maybe he didn't. Either way, the silence that followed was worse than accusation. It was acceptance. The quiet agreement of two people who had stopped reaching for each other long ago. I went upstairs into our room and stood by the window. The rain had started again, light and steady, painting the glass with silver streaks. Somewhere beyond those clouds was that lonely road, that house, that man whose touch I'd never forget. I wondered if he was still there, feeding the fire, thinking of me, or if I'd become just another traveler passing through his silence. I closed my eyes, pressing my palm to the glass. The coolness bit into my skin. I told myself I'd move on, that this would fade like every other mistake people bury under routine. But deep down I knew. Some moments carve themselves into you so quietly you don't feel the wound until much later. That night, I lay beside my husband, his breathing steady and unbothered. The space between us felt like a confession neither of us wanted to hear. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, thinking about the road, about the man who had shown me how fragile fidelity could be, and about the part of me that still longed for the storm.